My brother has been trying to buy your workshop, Mr. Walker, 3 times, through companies that don't officially exist. And if you don't help me stop him in 30 days, you won't have a workshop left to save. Ethan Walker went completely still. His work gloves were still in his hands. There was sawdust on his boots. He had packed his daughter's lunch that morning, argued with a building inspector by 7:50, and climbed a scaffold before 8. This was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday. It was not going to be an ordinary Tuesday. If this story is already hitting different, hit subscribe right now and follow every single part until the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Ethan Walker did not trust luxury. Not because he was bitter about money, he wasn't. He'd made peace with what he had a long time ago. He trusted luxury the way he trusted fresh paint on old wood. It usually meant someone was hiding something underneath. So when Danny Ruiz called up from the sidewalk that Tuesday morning and said, "There's a woman down here in a car that costs more than your whole block," Ethan's first instinct wasn't curiosity. It was suspicion. He finished what he was doing. He pressed his thumb into the corner jamb. Felt the soft give of compromised wood, made a mental note. Then he climbed down the scaffold, stripped his gloves, and walked over. She was standing beside the sedan with her arms at her sides, not fidgeting, not checking her phone. Just waiting. Like she was used to waiting for important things, and had learned not to waste the energy of impatience. Mid-30s, dark blazer. Eyes that had the particular quality Ethan associated with people who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and had decided not to let it show. He stopped 6 feet away. "You're Ethan Walker," she said. "You already knew that before you drove here." "I did." She didn't apologize for it. "My name is Victoria Bennett." "I know who you are." Something shifted in her expression, not surprise exactly. More like recalibration. She'd expected him to be impressed. He wasn't. "Then you know what Bennett Holdings is," she said. "I know you own half the historic properties in Charleston, and you've spent the last 4 years watching your company fall apart from the inside." He met her eyes. "And I know that whatever you came here to ask me, the answer is no." He turned to walk back to the scaffold. "Your workshop on Cypress Mill Road," she said behind him. He stopped. "Someone has tried to buy it 3 times in the last 14 months. Her voice was steady, deliberate, every word placed exactly where she intended it. 3 different company names, 3 different offers. Your property manager turned them all down without telling you." Ethan turned around slowly. "Who?" She held up a manila folder. "That's what I came to show you." He took the folder. He opened it. He read the first page, a property acquisition attempt 14 months ago through a company called Meridian Property Solutions. He didn't recognize the name. He read the second page. 11 months ago. Different company name. Same address on the incorporation documents. Third page. 8 months ago. He looked up. "These are shell companies." "Yes." "Whose?" "My brother's." The words sat in the air between them. Ethan looked back down at the documents. The workshop on Cypress Mill Road wasn't just a building to him. His father had built it over 3 years of weekends back when Ethan was young enough to think weekends were for playing and old enough to be handed a hammer anyway. Every wall in that place carried the specific texture of his father's decisions, where to run the electrical, how deep to set the footings, which corner to put the workbench, so the morning light hit it right. When his father died, Ethan didn't inherit money. He inherited that building. And somebody had been trying to take it from him. 3 times, in secret. While he was going to work every morning and picking up his daughter every afternoon and living his life like a man who had nothing to protect. His jaw tightened. "Explain," he said. His voice came out very quiet. That was always the warning sign, not when Ethan raised his voice, but when he lowered it. Victoria exhaled slowly. "Can we sit somewhere? We can stand right here. Talk." She talked. She didn't dress it up. Ethan appreciated that. Bennett Holdings had fractured after her father's death 4 years ago. The company passed to both her and her younger brother Nathan equal shares, unequal intentions. Victoria wanted to preserve what her grandfather had built. Nathan wanted to liquidate it. "He's been positioning for a takeover vote for 18 months, she said. "He's assembled enough board allies and investor relationships to force a shareholder vote on corporate restructuring. If he wins that vote, the company gets broken up. Every historic property gets sold to private developers. Every legacy division gets dissolved. 430 employees lose their jobs." She paused. "And Nathan walks away with approximately $160 million. And you want to stop him?" "I need to stop him. There's a difference." Ethan studied her. "Why me?" "Because Nathan has been mismanaging the restoration of our flagship property, the Grand Bennett Hotel, for 18 months. Inflating contracts, rerouting funds. He's using the renovation failures as evidence to shareholders that Bennett Holdings can't manage its own assets." She looked at him steadily. "I need someone who can walk into that building and read exactly what's been done wrong, document it, and give me evidence of deliberate sabotage. Someone Nathan won't see coming. You need a forensic accountant." "I need someone who knows what a restoration project is supposed to cost," she said, "and can prove in terms any judge or journalist can understand that this one was intentionally run into the ground." She paused. "I've looked at your work, Mr. Walker. You've flagged contract irregularities on 3 public projects in the last 5 years. You were right every time." Ethan was quiet. "My answer is still no," he said. Something crossed her face, not anger. Something closer to desperation that she was working very hard to keep controlled. "Mr. Walker, I have a daughter," he said. "She's 10. She's the reason I get up at 5 in the morning, and the reason I go home at a reasonable hour, and the reason I don't take jobs that put me in the middle of corporate warfare. I don't understand." He handed the folder back to her. "I'm sorry about your 430 employees. I mean that. But I can't be the man you need." She didn't take the folder. "Your daughter's name is Lily," Victoria said quietly. Ethan went very still. "She attends Hargrove Elementary. She's in the 4th grade. Her teacher's name is Ms. Patrice, who you apparently charmed into letting Lily bring her cat to school for Science Week." Something in Victoria's voice softened for just a moment, almost despite herself. "I did research, Mr. Walker. I do thorough research." "You researched my daughter." "I researched you. She came up because she's clearly the center of your life." She held his gaze. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that I know exactly who I'm asking. I know you're not a corporate strategist. I know you're not a lawyer. I know this is not your world." "Then why?" "Because Nathan has been trying to take your workshop." Her voice dropped, just slightly. "Not because he needs the property. The man has more money than he can spend. He's been trying to acquire it because someone told him it mattered to you. Because in Nathan Bennett's world, the way you win isn't by being stronger than your opponent." She paused. "It's by taking away what they love." The morning air between them seemed to shift. Ethan looked down at the folder still in his hands. He hadn't given it back. He hadn't realized he was still holding it. "Who told him about the workshop?" he asked. "We don't know yet." "But someone in my circle." "That's what the evidence suggests." Ethan felt something move through him that he hadn't felt in a long time. Not since the night the hospital called and he'd driven 60 miles per hour on empty roads and arrived 12 minutes too late. That specific coldness. That moment when the world rearranges itself around you and you understand that you have no choice about what happens next, only about who you decide to be while it's happening. He looked up. "I want to walk the Bennett Hotel property," he said. "Alone. No handlers, no board members, no press." Victoria blinked, just once, like she hadn't quite let herself believe he'd say yes. "When?" "Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. I'll arrange access." "And Ms. Bennett?" He waited until she was fully looking at him. "If I find one thing that tells me you've misrepresented any of this, I walk. No discussion. No second chances. I understand. And the documents in that folder, I want originals, not copies. Originals with chain of custody documentation. She nodded. You'll have them by 5 o'clock today. He handed the folder back to her finally. She took it. He pulled his work gloves on, turned back toward the scaffold, stopped. How bad is it? He asked without turning around. The hotel property. How bad has Nathan let it get? A pause. Bad enough, Victoria said, that the structural engineer we hired 6 months ago quit after 2 weeks and refused to say why. Ethan nodded slowly. 7 o'clock, he said. He climbed back up the scaffold. Tink. Danny was waiting for him at the top, pretending to measure something he'd already measured twice. Well, Danny said, none of your business. She's somebody important, isn't she? Danny. I'm just saying cars like that don't pull up to you. Danny. Danny measured something for the 3rd time. Ethan picked up his chisel and went back to work. But his hands weren't quite steady. Not enough for anyone to notice he'd spent 15 years making sure his hands told people nothing he didn't want them to know. But he noticed. He picked Lily up at 3:15. She came running out of the school doors the way she always did. Backpack bouncing, ponytail, flying, talking, before she was even within earshot. And Ms. Patrice said my presentation was the best one in the class, but Tyler said his was better, and I said the judges don't agree, and he said there weren't any judges, and I said exactly. Ethan caught her in a one-armed hug without breaking stride. She fit under his arm like she'd been designed specifically for that purpose. Sounds like Tyler doesn't understand how arguments work, he said. He really doesn't. She looked up at him as they walked. You okay, Dad? He glanced down at her. Why? You have your thinking face. I always have my thinking face. No, you have your problem thinking face. Your regular thinking face is different. She stated this with complete authority. The problem one makes this thing happen here. She pointed at the space between his eyebrows. 10 years old, and she could read him like a blueprint. I might have a new job, he said carefully. Bigger than the Morrison Street one. Different than the Morrison Street one. She was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, is it dangerous? He almost said no, automatically. The way parents do. The automatic comfort. He stopped himself. I don't know yet, he said instead. Lily nodded seriously, like she respected the honesty more than she would have respected the reassurance. She probably did. Well, she said, Grandpa always said the jobs worth doing are the ones that scare you a little. Ethan looked at his daughter, his father's words, in his daughter's mouth. 10 years after the man was gone. Yeah, he said quietly. He did say that. That night after Lily was asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table. The documents arrived at 4:58. Originals as promised in a sealed courier envelope with a chain of custody form signed by Victoria's attorney. He spread them across the table. He read everything. Twice. Slowly, the way he read anything that mattered, looking not just at what was written, but at what wasn't. The gaps. The spaces where something should have been and wasn't. 3 shell companies. 3 attempts to acquire his father's workshop. A paper trail that led carefully and deliberately back to Nathan Bennett's private investment network. Someone had looked at Ethan Walker's life and decided the workshop was his weak point. They weren't wrong, but they'd made a mistake. Because the thing about a man who spends his life restoring broken things, the thing nobody ever thinks about, is that he knows exactly how much damage something can take before it becomes irreparable. And he knows how to tell the difference. Ethan gathered the documents, stacked them neatly, placed them back in the envelope. He sat in the quiet kitchen for another long moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Marcus. Clear my whole schedule for the next 3 days, he said. Marcus inhaled sharply. 3 days, Ethan, the Caldwell job is... Push it. Call the client, apologize, give them a discount. Handle it. What's going on? Ethan looked at the envelope on the table. Something I should have gotten involved in a long time ago, he said. He hung up. He went to the window, looked out at the dark street. At the city that had held him his whole life, its old buildings and layered history, and the particular beauty of things that had survived long enough to matter. Somewhere across that city, a man named Nathan Bennett was certain he'd already won. Ethan picked up his work gloves from the counter. He set them by the door for morning. Some buildings look beyond saving. That's usually when Ethan Walker does his best work. Ethan arrived at the Grand Bennett Hotel at 6:53, 7 minutes early. Old habit. His father taught him that a man who shows up exactly on time is already behind, because the first 7 minutes of any job tell you everything the next 7 hours will confirm. The hotel had been closed for renovation for 14 months. That was the official story. The real story was written on every surface Ethan touched in the first 10 minutes, and what it said made his stomach turn. A property manager named Gerald Hicks met him at the service entrance. Mid-50s nervous hands, the specific kind of careful politeness that told Ethan the man had been instructed to cooperate, but not to volunteer anything. He handed Ethan a hard hat and a visitor badge and said, "Ms. Bennett asked me to give you full access." "I won't need you to walk with me," Ethan said. Gerald blinked. "My instructions were to—" "Your instructions were to give me full access. That's what I'm using." Ethan clipped the badge on. "I'll find you if I have questions." He didn't wait for an answer. He walked in alone. What he found in the next 4 hours wasn't just negligence. Negligence was accidental. This was something else entirely deliberate, methodical, and executed by someone who understood exactly how restoration work was supposed to be documented, so they knew precisely how to falsify it. The crown molding on the 3rd floor had been replaced with modern reproduction material at a cost billed as 400% above market rate. The original pieces, hand-carved irreplaceable, worth 3 times what the invoice claimed, were gone. Not disposed of. Gone. Which meant someone had sold them privately and billed the company for fake replacements. The subfloor on the east wing had been treated for moisture damage that didn't exist. Ethan pressed his knee gauge into 6 different sections. Dry. Every one of them. Someone had billed $62,000 for remediation work on a problem they had manufactured on paper. And the windows. Ethan's particular expertise, the thing he knew the way a surgeon knows anatomy. 11 of the original 14 historic window assemblies on the 2nd floor had been listed in the renovation log as beyond salvage, replaced with period-appropriate alternatives. He examined all 11. Every single one was salvageable. A trained professional would have known that from a 30-second inspection. Someone had destroyed them anyway. Or more accurately, someone had removed them, listed them as destroyed, and almost certainly sold them. He stood in the 2nd floor hallway for a long moment, looking at the empty frames where 11 windows that belonged in a museum had been replaced with something that belonged in a subdivision. His phone buzzed. "Victoria. Have you seen enough?" He typed back, "I've seen enough to know this isn't mismanagement. Call me at noon." He kept walking. By 11:30, he had filled 14 pages of his work notebook. Not with opinions. With measurements. Material assessments, cost comparisons, and cross-referenced documentation numbers. The kind of evidence that didn't require interpretation. The kind that spoke for itself in a language that contractors, judges, and journalists all understood equally well. He found Gerald Hicks near the lobby at 11:55. "Who approved the window replacement contract?" Ethan asked. Gerald's careful politeness flickered. "That would have gone through the renovation committee." "Who chairs the renovation committee?" A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. "Mr. Nathan Bennett has been overseeing the hotel project directly." Ethan wrote that down, slowly, making sure Gerald could see him writing it. "Thank you," Ethan said. "I'll be in touch." He walked out into the late morning and called Victoria. She picked up before the first ring finished. "Well, 14 months of deliberate sabotage," he said. "I can document at least 6 separate fraudulent billing schemes. Removed historic materials, sold off-site fake remediation work, Inflated contracts paid to vendors who almost certainly have a financial relationship with your brother. He paused. This isn't a renovation gone wrong, Ms. Bennett. This is a crime scene. Silence on the other end. Then quietly, can you prove it? Give me 2 weeks and access to the original contracts. Yes. Another silence. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, stripped of some professional layer, just slightly raw underneath. Mr. Walker, I need you to understand something. If Nathan finds out what you're doing before we have everything in place, he'll come after the workshop. He'll come after more than the workshop. Ethan let that sit. Then we move fast, he said. And we move quiet. He told Victoria he'd need 2 things: a formal advisory role that gave him legitimate access to project documents and complete silence about the real reason he'd been brought in. She delivered both within 48 hours. By Thursday morning, Ethan Walker was officially listed on the Bennett Holdings website as a historic preservation consultant for the Grand Bennett Hotel renovation. The announcement was small, buried in the company's news section. Victoria had insisted on that quiet enough not to attract attention, official enough to give Ethan legal standing to request documents. It didn't stay quiet. By Thursday afternoon, 3 board members had called Victoria's office demanding an explanation. By Friday morning, it had leaked to a financial blog with the headline, Bennett Holdings brings in local handyman as special advisor. Desperation move or PR stunt? Ethan found out about the headline when Danny forwarded it to him at 7 a.m. with a single message. Your famous boss. He ignored it. What he couldn't ignore was the phone call that came at 8:15 from a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't pick up. Then something made him. Mr. Walker. The voice was smooth, educated, and warm in the particular way of people who had practiced warmth until it became a tool. My name is Nathan Bennett. I think it's time we had a conversation. Ethan was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. How did you get this number? I'm a resourceful person. A small pause. I imagine that's something you can relate to. What do you want? To save you from making a very expensive mistake. The warmth in Nathan's voice didn't change. That was the unsettling part. My sister has a gift for recruiting people to her cause. She's compelling and she's smart and she genuinely believes everything she's telling you. But Mr. Walker, there are things she hasn't shared with you about the company, about the situation, about her own role in what's happened. If you have information, put it in writing and send it to my attorney. Nathan laughed softly. It wasn't an unkind laugh. That was somehow worse. You don't have an attorney. I'll get one. Mr. Walker. The warmth dropped just slightly, just enough to let the real temperature show through. I want you to think carefully about what you're walking into. You have a business, a reputation, a daughter in the 4th grade at Hargrove Elementary. A pause. These are things worth protecting. Ethan felt the cold hit him before the anger did. Are you threatening my daughter? I'm expressing concern, Nathan said smoothly. For someone who has built something real and doesn't need to risk it over my sister's corporate difficulties. Don't ever mention my daughter again. Mr. Walker. This conversation is over. He hung up. Stood still for a moment, phone in his hand, feeling something that was past anger and approaching something else entirely. A hard, quiet resolve that settled into his chest like a load-bearing beam. Solid. Unmovable. He called Victoria. Your brother just called me, he said when she picked up. He mentioned Lily. A sharp intake of breath. Ethan, I'm in. He heard her start to speak and kept going. I was halfway in before. Now I'm all the way in. But I need you to hear me clearly. I do this my way. I follow the evidence where it goes. I document what I find, and I don't cut corners, and I don't bend facts, even if what I find is uncomfortable. Even if it complicates things for you. A pause. Then steadily, I wouldn't have it any other way. Good. He put his keys in his pocket. I'm coming to your office. We need to build a timeline. He'd expected a conference room and a team of lawyers. What he found was Victoria alone in her office jacket off 3 whiteboards, covered in handwriting, and 2 empty coffee cups on the desk. She looked like someone who had been working since before either of them woke up. She looked for the first time like a person instead of a position. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "I didn't leave last night." He looked at the whiteboards. Names, dates, transaction numbers, arrows connecting things. The organizational logic of someone who thought in systems. You mapped it yourself. The lawyers map things in ways that protect themselves first. She handed him a coffee that was still hot, which meant she'd heard him coming. "I map things in ways that find the truth." He stood in front of the first whiteboard and spent 5 minutes reading. Then he picked up a marker and drew a single line connecting 2 transaction dates she hadn't linked. "These 2 vendor payments," he said. 14 days apart. Same billing address, 2 different company names. She came to stand beside him, close enough that he could hear her breath change. "That's the same company." "Almost certainly. I've seen this pattern on fraudulent renovation contracts before. They split the billing to stay under the audit threshold." "How much under the threshold?" $11,000 each time. Anything over $25,000 triggers an automatic secondary review. She stared at the whiteboard. "He knew our audit protocols. He's been on the board for 4 years. Of course he knew." "Which means someone in finance helped him structure it." "That's what it means." She was quiet. Then, "If there's someone inside the company feeding him information, then anything we find could be compromised before we have time to act on it." He capped the marker. "How many people know the real reason I'm here?" 3. Me, my attorney, and my assistant Diane, who has worked for this family for 22 years. "Keep it at 3. She nodded. Then she said quietly, like she'd been holding it, "He called you." "Yes." "And he mentioned Lily." "Yes." She turned to look at him fully. "I'm sorry. I should have anticipated." "You couldn't have anticipated everything he does. That's not a reasonable standard." He said it matter-of-factly, not as comfort but as assessment. "What I need to know is whether this changes your timeline." She studied him. "Does it change yours?" "No, it makes mine shorter." Something in her expression shifted. Something that moved through careful professional control and became briefly something that looked like relief. The specific relief of a person who has been holding everything alone for so long that even having one other person on solid ground beside them feels like setting down a weight they'd forgotten they were carrying. She turned back to the whiteboards. "Then let's get to work." They worked for 6 hours. Not the same kind of work she understood the financial architecture. He understood the physical evidence, and somewhere in the space between those two things, the picture assembled itself with the particular clarity of a thing that had always been true, waiting to be found. By 4 in the afternoon, they had a preliminary document chain covering 9 separate fraudulent billing events totaling just over $3 million. Enough to begin a case, not enough to finish one. "We need the vendor contracts," Ethan said. "The originals, with signatures. They're in the company archive, physical copies." "Are they secure?" She hesitated. "Victoria, they were secure," she said carefully. "Until last month, when the archive room had a maintenance issue that required the lock to be temporarily rekeyed." Ethan stared at her. "And were any documents accessed during that window?" "We don't know. The access logs for that period are incomplete." He put down his pen. "So Nathan may have already gotten to the originals." "It's possible. Which means if we request them, and they've been altered, he'll know we're looking at the right things." The room held a particular quiet. "Then we don't request them," Ethan said. "Not yet. We build the case from the physical evidence first from the hotel itself. Things that can't be altered because they're built into the walls." He picked the pen back up. "We go back to the hotel tomorrow. Both of us." Victoria blinked. "Me. You're the CEO of the company. Your presence there is legitimate, unremarkable, and expected." He looked at her. And you have a very good eye for numbers. I need that eye looking at the same things I'm looking at, so that when we testify, if it comes to that, we have two independent assessments of the same evidence. She was quiet for a moment. Then, all right. Wear shoes you can walk in for 4 hours. She looked at him with an expression that was caught exactly halfway between offended and amused. I do own shoes I can walk in. The ones you wore this morning cost about $800 and have a 2-inch heel. I wasn't planning on a construction site this morning. Fair, he said. 7 a.m. tomorrow. He gathered his notebook and jacket. At the door he stopped. Ms. Bennett. Victoria, she said. We've been in the same room for 6 hours. You can use my name. He accepted that with a nod. Victoria. What you've built this company, this fight to keep it, your brother picked the wrong person to underestimate. She was quiet for a beat. Something crossed her face that she didn't fully suppress exhaustion and something softer underneath it. So, did he, she said, when he went after your workshop? Ethan walked out. In the elevator on the way down, he stood in the quiet and thought about the whiteboard. The connecting lines. The pattern that was emerging not just of fraud, but of calculation. Nathan Bennett hadn't improvised this. He'd engineered it. Over years. With patience and precision and the particular cruelty of someone who understood that the best way to destroy something was slowly, so that nobody noticed until it was already gone. Ethan had spent 15 years restoring things that had been destroyed slowly. He knew exactly how that worked. And he knew with the certainty that only comes from having spent your whole life reading the stories that buildings tell, that Nathan Bennett had made one critical mistake. He'd left evidence in the walls. And walls Ethan Walker knew how to read. They went back to the hotel the next morning just as Ethan said. Victoria showed up at 6:58 in flat boots and dark jeans, and a look on her face that said she hadn't slept much but had used the hours productively. She was carrying a leather portfolio and a coffee thermos with 2 cups, which Ethan noted without comment. He took the coffee. They didn't waste time on pleasantries. They walked the property together for 4 hours, floor by floor, room by room, and somewhere in the second hour, something shifted between them. The professional distance compressed not into something inappropriate, but into something more honest. The kind of honesty that happens when 2 people are looking at the same ugly truth and neither of them is pretending it isn't ugly. This window assembly, Ethan said, standing in front of one of the ruined second-floor frames. The original would have been white oak. You can see the ghost of the original mortise joint in the surrounding wall plaster. Whoever removed it knew what they were doing. They were careful. This wasn't a contractor making a bad call. This was someone directed to remove it and leave as little trace as possible. Victoria was writing, fast. How do you know it was white oak? Because every other original assembly in this building that hasn't been touched is white oak. It was the standard material for coastal Carolina construction in this period. Whoever spec'd the replacement used pine. Different grain, different weight, different sound when you tap it. He knocked his knuckle against the frame, then against the wall beside it. Hear the difference. She listened. Knocked the same 2 spots herself. Yes, a good contractor would have caught that on inspection, which means either the inspection was fraudulent or the inspector was paid to miss it. She wrote that down without looking up. Or both. Or both, he agreed. They kept moving. By the time they reached the basement utility level, Ethan had found something he wasn't expecting. A secondary set of material delivery logs, tucked behind an electrical panel, housing apparently overlooked when someone had cleaned out the renovation office. Carbon copy receipts, old-fashioned, handwritten ones, from a supplier called Coastal Heritage Materials. The dates matched the window removal period. The quantities matched what should have been pulled from the building. Someone had received those original materials, signed for them. And that signature was on every receipt. He showed Victoria without a word. She read the name on the signature line. Her face went completely still. You recognize it, Ethan said. Marcus Teal, she said quietly. He's Nathan's personal project coordinator. He's been on site at this hotel every week for 14 months. She looked up. Ethan, this is a direct chain. This connects Nathan's office to the removal of the materials. It does. This is what we needed. It's part of what we needed. He took the receipts, carefully bagged them in a clear folder he'd brought for exactly this purpose. We need to move these to your attorney today, not tomorrow. Today. She was already reaching for her phone. That was the moment Gerald Hicks appeared at the bottom of the basement stairs. His nervous energy from the day before was gone. In its place was something tighter, more directed. He looked at the folder in Ethan's hands and then at Victoria, and his expression did something complicated and fast. "Ms. Bennett," he said. "I didn't know you were on site today." "Clearly," Victoria said. "I'm going to need to ask about those documents." He nodded toward the folder. "Anything removed from the property needs to go through the renovation committee before I'm the CEO of this company, Gerald." Her voice was quiet and absolute. "The renovation committee reports to me, not the other way around." Gerald's jaw tightened. "I have instructions." "From whom?" Silence. "From whom, Gerald?" He didn't answer, which was of course its own answer. Victoria held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said very calmly, "You should call whoever gave you those instructions and let them know that I was here today, and that I found what I found, and that I suggest they speak with an attorney." She picked up her portfolio. "Have a good morning." She walked past him. Ethan followed. Neither of them looked back. In the car, she exhaled for the first time in what felt like a long while. "He's going to call Nathan within 5 minutes." "I know. Which means Nathan knows we have the receipts. Which means our window just got a lot smaller." Ethan looked at her. "How fast can your attorney move?" "Margaret Chen doesn't move fast," she said. "She moves correctly, which is usually faster than fast." She was already dialing. "I'll have her meet us in an hour." Margaret Chen was exactly what the situation required, a 61-year-old corporate litigation attorney who had the particular calm of someone who had seen worse and won anyway. She reviewed the delivery receipts in 11 minutes, asked 6 precise questions, and then looked at both of them over the top of her reading glasses. "This is enough to request a formal audit," she said. "Not enough to stop the shareholder vote." "How long until the vote?" Ethan asked. 18 days, Victoria said. "Then we have 16, Margaret said, "because on day 17, whatever we have goes in front of the board and whatever isn't ready doesn't get used." She set the documents down. "What else do you have?" Ethan laid out 14 pages of documented irregularities. Material assessments, cost comparisons, fraudulent billing records, the 9 billing events from yesterday's session with Victoria. Margaret read through everything with the focused efficiency of someone billing by the hour and taking it seriously regardless. When she finished, she said, "You've built a strong circumstantial case. What you're missing is a direct financial connection between Nathan Bennett personally and the funds that went missing." "The shell companies," Ethan said. "We can show they exist and that they trace back to his network. That's not the same as showing money moved through them into his accounts." "What if we could show payments made to those companies from Bennett Holdings vendor accounts?" Victoria asked. "That would be significantly more useful." Victoria and Ethan looked at each other. "The vendor contracts in the archive," he said. "Which Nathan may have already accessed," she said. "Or may not have." He kept his voice level. "We don't know. We can't assume the worst until we look." Margaret watched this exchange with the attentive expression of someone whose job required her to understand not just facts, but the people who held them. "I can request a court-supervised archive access," she said. "That means the documents are retrieved under neutral oversight, and whatever condition they're in becomes part of the official record, whether they've been altered or not." "How long does that take?" Victoria asked. "If I file today and call in one favor 48 hours. "File today," Victoria said. Margaret nodded and began gathering papers. At the door, she paused. Victoria, if Nathan is informed about this filing before it's executed, he won't be, Victoria said. Margaret looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Ethan. Then she left without another word. The room was quiet. She doesn't entirely trust me, Victoria said. Not accusatory, just an observation. She trusts the documents, Ethan said. That's what matters. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, from a different place, a softer one. Why are you so calm right now? He thought about it honestly. Because I've been in buildings that looked completely beyond saving and found the load-bearing structure still intact underneath. When that happens, you don't panic. You work. He looked at her. The structure is still intact here. We just have to work fast enough. She held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she nodded once and went back to the documents. The leak happened on day 4. Ethan found out the way most people find out about disasters from someone else's phone screen. Danny forwarded him a link at 6:47 in the morning before Ethan had finished his first cup of coffee. A financial news site had published what they claimed were internal Bennett Holdings documents showing significant financial irregularities, framed not as evidence of Nathan's fraud, but as evidence of Victoria's mismanagement. Someone had taken the same facts and reversed the narrative entirely. He called Victoria. She picked up on the first ring, which told him she'd been awake for a while. I've seen it. Is any of it fabricated? The documents are real. The interpretation is inverted. Someone leaked selectively. They chose the records that look worst for me out of context and left out everything that explains them. Nathan, or someone working for him. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, not panic, but the specific exhaustion of someone watching their work be dismantled in real time. The stock is down 9% at opening. 9%. On a company the size of Bennett Holdings that was tens of millions of dollars in shareholder value gone before breakfast. Who has access to those documents? Ethan asked. They were in the financial review packet I sent to 3 board members 2 days ago. Members I thought were neutral. One of them isn't. One of them isn't, she agreed. Quietly. Ethan set his coffee down. Which 3? She gave him the names. He wrote them down. He looked at the list for a moment and then asked, which one has the most to gain personally if Nathan's restructuring goes through? A pause. Robert Caldwell, she said slowly. He has a private equity interest in a development group that has been trying to acquire 2 of our historic properties for 3 years. If Nathan liquidates those properties, Caldwell's group acquires them at below market rates in the chaos, Ethan finished, and Caldwell's board vote tips Nathan over the threshold he needs. The silence that followed had weight to it. I trusted him, Victoria said. Not helplessly. With the particular flat tone of someone filing a fact about themselves that they intend to correct. Now you know, Ethan said. That's the difference between today and yesterday. He could hear her breathing steadily on the other end. Recalibrating. What do? We don't react to the leak. Reacting confirms we're rattled. We keep working the evidence and we let Margaret's archive request execute on schedule. He paused. And we need to talk to your board. Not all of them, just the ones who haven't committed either direction yet. Before Nathan does. He's already calling them. Then we're already late. Who can you get in a room today? She got 4 of them. A conference call at noon, not a formal meeting, just a conversation. Ethan sat across from Victoria as she spoke, watching her work, and what he saw was something he hadn't quite anticipated. She was extraordinary under pressure, not in the polished, performed way of politicians and executives who had been media-trained into a facsimile of composure. Genuinely humanly extraordinary, she spoke to those 4 board members the way Ethan's father used to speak to clients who were panicking about a building they thought was lost, with a steadiness that was honest about the danger and specific about the path through it. She didn't minimize the leak. She didn't spin it. She said someone on this board gave confidential documents to a journalist with the specific intent of misrepresenting them. I know that you know that, And within 48 hours, when the archive review executes, and we have the full picture in front of all of you, you'll understand exactly what those documents mean in context. She paused. I'm asking you not to make a decision about this company based on a selectively edited version of the truth. That's all I'm asking. One of the four, a woman named Patricia Huang, who had been on the board for 11 years, said, "Victoria, the investors are nervous. The stock movement today is exactly what Nathan wanted," Victoria said. "I need you to ask yourself who benefits from this company losing value in the next 18 days. And then I need you to ask yourself whether those are the people whose judgment you trust." Silence. Another board member said, "Who is the man sitting across from you?" Victoria looked at Ethan. He hadn't spoken once. "This is Ethan Walker. He's the person who found the evidence that's going to answer every question you have." "The window repairman." The skepticism in the voice was undisguised. "The man," Victoria said evenly, "who walked into the Grand Bennett Hotel and identified $3 million of deliberate fraud in 4 hours that 14 months of renovation oversight missed." She didn't look away from the camera. "I suggest we spend less time worrying about his job title and more time looking at his results." Ethan said nothing, but he looked at Victoria and thought she didn't need the lawyers as much as she thought she did. 1. The video appeared at 9:17 that evening. Ethan was at home, Lily already asleep when his phone lit up with calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Then Danny called. Then Marcus. Then Victoria. He answered Victoria first. "There's a video," she said. "It's on 3 financial news platforms and spreading on social media. Ethan—" She stopped, which was more alarming than anything she could have said. Victoria Bennett did not stop in the middle of sentences. "Tell me," he said. "It's edited footage from the hotel. Security camera recordings from 3 separate visits you made to the property. They've been cut together with audio. I don't know where the audio came from, whether it's fabricated or taken out of context, but the way it's assembled, it looks like you were there to evaluate properties for personal acquisition. Like you were using the advisory role to identify historic materials you could redirect to your own restoration business." Ethan sat very still. "They're saying I was stealing from the project. They're implying it in a way that's very difficult to immediately disprove because the raw footage is real. It's the context that's manufactured." His phone was buzzing constantly now. Unknown numbers. He silenced it. "My workshop," he said. "If people believe this, my contracts—" "I know." Her voice was tight. "I'm so sorry. I should have anticipated that he'd come after your credibility directly. I should have, Stop." He said it quietly. "This isn't your fault." "Ethan." "Victoria, stop." He stood up, walked to the kitchen window, stood in the dark looking at the street. "Has Margaret seen it?" "She's watching it right now. She says we have grounds for defamation, but that takes time we don't have." "Then we don't use that. What do we have that directly contradicts the narrative in the video? Your documentation, your inspection notes. The timeline that shows every visit you made was logged, accompanied, or verified by Gerald Hicks. Gerald Hicks, who is almost certainly working with Nathan." A pause. "Yes." "Who else was there on the first visit?" "2 of the renovation crew members. They signed the visitor log." "Get me their names." He was already moving, pulling his notebook from his jacket on the counter. "And get me the original visitor logs from all 3 of my hotel visits. If those are authentic documents with authentic timestamps, they tell the real timeline." He paused. "And I need the hotel's full security footage archive, not just the clips they used. The unedited version shows what was actually happening in those rooms. Nathan controls the renovation committee. He controls access to that archive. Then we request it through Margaret's court access, right now, tonight." He was writing as he talked. "If he deletes or alters that footage after a court access has been requested, that's obstruction. That's criminal." He stopped. "Victoria, this might actually be the mistake he can't recover from." Silence. Then, "You think he overplayed. I think a man who has been winning for 18 months got impatient." He looked at his notebook. "The evidence chain we built, the receipts, the billing records, the material documentation, none of that is in the video. He didn't touch it because he doesn't know exactly what we have. He tried to take me off the board before I could use it." He paused. "Which means he's scared." The line was quiet for a long moment. Then Victoria said with a different quality in her voice, something that was moving past exhaustion and toward something harder and cleaner. "What do you need me to do?" "Call Margaret. Tonight. I don't care what time it is." He looked at his daughter's bedroom door at the end of the hallway, closed, Lily asleep and safe and unaware. "And Victoria, what he said when he called me, about protecting what matters. He meant it as a threat." "I know. So did I," Ethan said. "So did I." He hung up and stood in his kitchen in the dark and thought about his father, who had built something real with his hands and passed it on, and about Lily, asleep down the hall, who deserved a world where that still meant something, and about $3 million of carefully documented fraud sitting in a lawyer's office waiting to be heard. Nathan Bennett had built his strategy on the assumption that Ethan Walker had something to lose. He was right, but he'd made the oldest mistake in the book. He'd aimed at what Ethan loved and thought that would stop him. It had never once in 38 years worked that way. Margaret Chen filed the emergency court access request at 11:47 that night. Ethan knew because she sent him a time-stamped confirmation at 11:48 with a single line underneath. "Now we wait. Don't talk to anyone who isn't me or Victoria." He put his phone down and went to check on Lily. She was asleep on her side, one arm wrapped around the worn stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3, and refused to acknowledge she still slept with. He stood in the doorway for a moment, not going in, just watching her breathe. There was something about watching a sleeping child that cut through everything. All the noise and strategy and controlled anger of the last week reduced itself to this one quiet fact: she was here, she was safe, and he intended to keep her that way. He went back to the kitchen table and opened his notebook. He worked until 2 in the morning, cross-referencing everything they had: the delivery receipts, the billing irregularities, the timeline of Nathan's vendor relationships, building the presentation, the way he'd build a structural argument for a historic property. Layer by layer, each piece supporting the next. Nothing floating, nothing assumed, everything load-bearing. At 2:15, his phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "You should ask Victoria about the Hargrove deal. Ask her what her father was going to do before he died. Ask her what she knew." He stared at it for a long moment. Then he set the phone face down on the table and kept working. He didn't mention the text to Victoria the next morning. Not because he was hiding it, because he'd learned in 15 years of restoration work that anonymous information delivered at 2 in the morning was designed to destabilize, not illuminate. He filed it away and kept his eyes on the documented evidence in front of him. Margaret's court access executed at 9 a.m. on day 6. A neutral court officer accompanied by 2 attorneys entered the Bennett Holdings archive room at 9:03. Margaret was on the phone with Ethan in real time as her paralegal relayed updates from inside. At 9:11, the paralegal said, "Some of the vendor contract files have been removed." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "How many?" Margaret relayed the question. The answer came back: approximately 30% of the files from the hotel renovation period. "When were they removed?" A pause while the court officer checked the access log. 3 days ago. Accessed under authorization of the renovation committee. Nathan had moved the moment Gerald Hicks called him from the hotel basement. 3 days ago, within hours of Ethan and Victoria finding the delivery receipts. "He took the wrong files," Ethan said. Margaret paused. "Explain." "He took the vendor contracts because those were the most obvious paper trail. But he didn't take the delivery receipts because he didn't know we'd already found them. And he didn't take the original material inspection reports because those are filed under a different department, property management, not renovation." He was already moving to the second section of his notebook. Margaret, tell them to look for the property management files from the same period. Any document tagged with the hotel's asset number under the maintenance and inspection category. A 2-minute wait that felt considerably longer. Then, they're here, complete, untouched. Ethan closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Pull everything, he said. Every page. The property management files were the missing spine of the entire case. They contained original material condition reports, independent assessments conducted every 6 months by a third-party inspector that Bennett Holdings had been using for 11 years. These reports documented in precise professional language the condition of every historic material in the Grand Bennett Hotel going back nearly a decade, including the white oak window assemblies, including the crown molding, including the subfloor sections that had been billed for moisture remediation that never happened. The report showed every one of those materials was in good to excellent condition, 12 months before Nathan's renovation team claimed they were damaged beyond repair. That was not an opinion. That was a dated, signed professional assessment that directly contradicted every fraudulent billing claim they had documented. Margaret read through the summary her paralegal sent her and said with the particular flatness of someone who had trained themselves not to show excitement in professional settings, "This is enough." Enough for what? Ethan asked. Enough to stop the shareholder vote, enough to open a federal fraud investigation, and enough, she said, to walk into that boardroom in 12 days and end this. Ethan exhaled slowly. What do we do with the video? The full security archive was retrieved as part of the court order. My tech team is reviewing it now. If the audio was fabricated or spliced, and I believe it was, we'll have a forensic analysis within 72 hours. And if it was fabricated, then Nathan Bennett just committed defamation and evidence tampering in addition to corporate fraud. A pause. He may have been running this play for 18 months, but he made his most serious mistakes in the last 6 days. Ethan thought about what he'd said to Victoria the night before. He overplayed. "Get me the full evidence package as soon as it's compiled," he said. "I want to review everything before the board presentation." "You'll have it." He hung up and called Victoria. She answered on the first ring the way she always did now. "Tell me." "We have enough," he said. "Start preparing the board presentation." There was a silence on the line that was different from her other silences. Smaller, more human. "Ethan!" Her voice had something in it he hadn't heard before. Not relief exactly, something rawer than relief. Like a person who has been braced for impact for so long that when the impact doesn't come, their body doesn't know immediately how to recalibrate. "Are you sure?" "The property management files are clean and complete. 12 months of independent condition reports that directly contradict every major fraudulent billing claim. Combined with the delivery receipts and the billing irregularities, we have a documented cross-referenced evidence chain that any jury in the country would follow. The board isn't a jury. No, but 6 of your undecided board members are business people who understand that being on the wrong side of a federal fraud investigation is worse than any short-term financial pressure Nathan can apply." He paused. "We show them the evidence. We let them make the intelligent decision." Another silence. Then, "There's something I need to tell you." The shift in her tone was enough to stop him. "What?" "Someone sent me a message last night, anonymous. It mentioned the Hargrove deal and my father." She was quiet for a moment. "Did you get something similar?" He had not expected that. "Yes, last night, 2 in the morning." "So he sent it to both of us?" Not a question. Working it out as she spoke. "He wants us to turn on each other. He wants me to think you're investigating me, and he wants you to think I'm hiding something." "Are you hiding something?" The directness landed in the silence and sat there. "No," she said. And then, without waiting for him to respond, "The Hargrove deal was a property acquisition my father was negotiating before he died. Nathan has tried to use it to suggest that our family has a pattern of questionable land deals. It was investigated 3 years ago by the company's independent auditor and cleared completely." A beat. "I didn't tell you about it because it wasn't relevant to what we're building. Is there anything else you haven't told me because you decided it wasn't relevant? A pause that was exactly long enough to make him notice it. My father left the company to both of us equally, she said carefully, because he believed Nathan would grow into the responsibility. He told me that 6 months before he died. He also told me he was wrong about Nathan and that he was going to amend the succession structure. She stopped. He died before he could do it. I've never made that public because it would look like I was trying to delegitimize Nathan's legal standing, and the company's stability depends on legitimate governance. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. That's the thing I haven't said out loud to anyone. Now you know it. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Thank you, he said, for telling you something I should have told you days ago, for trusting me with it now. Another silence, a different quality to this one. Come to my office this afternoon. We need to build the board presentation together. I'll be there at 2. They worked for 3 days straight. Not continuously. Ethan still picked up Lily from school, still sat at the kitchen table with her while she did homework, still made sure her world stayed exactly as intact as he could keep it. But every hour that wasn't Lily was the board presentation, the evidence package, the forensic analysis of the video that Margaret's tech team was building methodically and without shortcuts. On day 2, the forensic results came back. The audio in the video was synthetic, not recorded generated. A voice model trained on legitimate recordings of Ethan's voice from 2 public project presentations he'd given the previous year, then used to create dialogue he had never spoken. It was sophisticated work, the kind that cost money and required expertise. Margaret's team produced a 12-page technical report documenting exactly how it had been done. When Ethan read it, he felt something he hadn't quite expected. Not anger, because the anger had been there since the beginning, and he'd learned to use it as fuel rather than noise. What he felt was something closer to a grim satisfaction, because this was the kind of mistake that only arrogant people made. The kind of people who believed they were operating at a level where the details didn't catch up with them. The details always caught up. Nathan spent money on this, he told Victoria. Significant money, which means he was scared enough of what we had to take a risk he wouldn't have taken if he were thinking clearly. He was watching us build the case, and he panicked. He panicked, and he weaponized your credibility, first the leak, and then mine, the video, because those were the 2 threats he understood, the financial reputation and the personal reputation. Ethan set the forensic report down. What he didn't touch was the physical evidence in the walls of that building, because he doesn't understand physical evidence the way he understands financial maneuvering. Victoria looked at him. That's why he never saw you coming. That's why, he said simply. On day 9, something happened that neither of them had planned for. Danny called Ethan at 4:30 in the afternoon, and his voice had a quality that Ethan recognized immediately, the careful steadiness of a man delivering bad news to someone he cared about. You need to come to the workshop, Danny said. What happened? Just come. The workshop on Cypress Mill Road was intact. No damage, no break-in. But taped to the front door was a legal notice from a property development firm, not one of the shell companies they'd already identified. A new one, claiming that the workshop property had been purchased from a third-party holding company 6 weeks ago, and that Ethan had 30 days to vacate. He stood in front of that notice for a long time. Danny was beside him, not saying anything, which was the right call. Ethan reached up and took the notice off the door carefully, the way he handled any document that was going to be used as evidence. He turned it over, read every line. His father had built this building over 3 years of weekends. Every wall carried decisions his father had made. Every corner was a memory Ethan had stored in his body the way a building stores the memory of the hands that built it. His phone buzzed. A text from Nathan's number, the same number from the first call. A misunderstanding, I am sure. These property transfers can get complicated. I imagine it could be resolved through a conversation. Call me. Ethan read it twice. He put the notice in his jacket pocket. He turned to Danny. Get everyone off site for the next 48 hours. Full pay. Tell them there's a scheduling conflict. Danny's eyebrows went up. Ethan, I don't want anyone here if this escalates. Understood? A beat. Then Danny nodded. Understood. Ethan drove to Victoria's office without calling ahead. He walked in. Her assistant started to say she was in a meeting, and he said quietly, "Please tell her Ethan is here. She'll want to know." And something in his voice made the assistant pick up the phone without arguing. Victoria came out 40 seconds later, took one look at his face and said, "What did he do?" He handed her the notice. She read it. Her face did something complicated and fast, fury and guilt moving through it simultaneously, neither one winning. This is fabricated. That property has been in your family. He can delay, Ethan said. Even if it's ultimately fraudulent, a property dispute in court takes months. Months I don't have if my clients think my workshop is compromised. He looked at her steadily. This was his backup plan. The video was meant to take me out of the fight. When it didn't, he went for the workshop. He's trying to force you to call him. Yes. And negotiate. Yes. She looked up from the notice. What are you going to do? Ethan was quiet for a moment. He thought about his father's hands, about Lily's voice saying the jobs worth doing are the ones that scare you a little, about 430 people, and a building full of evidence, and 12 days until a shareholder vote that was going to determine what kind of world some of those things survived in. I'm going to call him, he said. Victoria went very still. Ethan, I'm going to call him, and I'm going to let him think he has leverage, and while he's operating on that assumption, you and Margaret are going to execute the board presentation 2 days early. He held her gaze. He's watching me. Right now, I am the only thing he's watching, which means he's not watching you. She understood immediately. He could see it move through her expression, the specific comprehension of a strategist recognizing a move they should have seen before it was named. You're the decoy, she said. I'm the thing he aimed at, Ethan said. That's not the same as being the decoy. I'm still doing real damage. But while I have his attention, I take the evidence to the board. To the undecided members first, privately, tonight and tomorrow. Then the full board presentation the following morning. He paused. Can you get all 6 undecided members in separate conversations in the next 36 hours? Patricia Huang will meet with me tonight. The others. She was already thinking, already moving. Yes, I can do this. Margaret needs to be in every conversation. Agreed. And Victoria. He waited until she was fully present. Don't tell me what they say until it's done. I need to be genuinely focused on Nathan when I call him, and if I know what's happening on your end in real time, I'll be thinking about it. She looked at him for a long moment. You're asking me to cut you out of the loop deliberately. I'm asking you to trust me enough to let me do what I'm doing while you do what you're doing. The room was very quiet. All right, she said, and then from a place she usually kept more carefully guarded. Be careful with him, Ethan. He's not just ruthless, he's smart. So am I, Ethan said. I've just been quiet about it longer. He called Nathan from the parking garage. Nathan picked up on the second ring and said warmly, like they were old friends reconnecting, Mr. Walker, I was hoping to hear from you. The property notice, Ethan said. I want to understand what it would take to resolve it. I think that's a very reasonable question. The warmth in Nathan's voice was doing its practiced work. And I think the answer is simpler than you might expect. A conversation between reasonable people. Perhaps over the next few days, given how much pressure you must be under right now, I don't want to rush anything. A few days. Long enough for the shareholder vote. I can meet tomorrow, Ethan said. Neutral location. A pause. Tomorrow is quite soon. The notice gives me 30 days. I'd like to start resolving it. Another pause. Recalibrating. All right. Tomorrow afternoon. Say 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock. Ethan agreed. He hung up and stood in the parking garage and thought about walls. About the stories they held. about everything a building could survive if the foundation was sound enough. In 12 years of restoration work, he had never once walked away from a building that still had its bones intact. This one did. He went home and made dinner and helped Lily with her homework and told her the problem was getting smaller. She said with complete seriousness, "Good, because Ms. Patrice says all problems have a solution if you look at them from the right angle." Ethan looked at his daughter. "Ms. Patrice," he said, "is a very wise woman." He cleaned up the kitchen and went to bed and slept better than he had in 9 days, because tomorrow Nathan Bennett was going to spend 2 hours looking at the wrong wall entirely. And on the other side of the city, Victoria Bennett was walking into the first of 6 conversations that were going to determine everything. Nathan Bennett was already seated when Ethan arrived. That told Ethan something. Men who believed they held all the power typically made the other person wait. Nathan being early meant he was more anxious than he'd let on over the phone. He was seated at a corner table in a quiet hotel restaurant, not the Grand Bennett somewhere neutral, which was Nathan's choice and which Ethan had agreed to without negotiating because the location didn't matter. What mattered was the next 2 hours and what Victoria was doing during them. Nathan stood when Ethan approached. He was younger looking than Ethan expected. Early 40s, well-dressed without being flashy, with an open face that had probably disarmed a great many people over the years. He extended his hand with a smile that was genuinely warm. That was the thing about Nathan Bennett that was most dangerous. He didn't read like a villain. He read like a reasonable man. "Mr. Walker, thank you for coming." Ethan shook his hand, sat down. "The property notice." Nathan's smile stayed exactly where it was. "Straight to business. I respect that." He settled back in his chair. "The notice is a formality at this point, honestly. A transaction that moved through several layers of our investment structure and created a documentation issue that I wasn't personally aware of until recently." He opened his hands in a gesture of candid helplessness. "These things happen in complex organizations." "Which organization currently holds the title?" A slight pause. "That's being clarified." "By whom?" "Our legal team." "Your legal team," Ethan said, "or Bennett Holdings' legal team?" Nathan looked at him steadily for a moment, recalibrating the same way he'd recalibrated on the phone. "You're more precise than I expected." "People say that. I imagine they do." Nathan picked up his coffee. "Mr. Walker, I want to be direct with you. I think my sister has put you in a very difficult position professionally, personally, and I think she did so without fully disclosing the complexity of what she was asking you to walk into." "She disclosed enough." "Did she tell you about the state of the company's finances?" "The actual state, not the version that looks good for the board presentation she's presumably preparing." Ethan said nothing, which Nathan interpreted correctly as permission to continue. "Bennett Holdings has been losing ground for 4 years, Nathan said. Not because of anything I've done. Because the business model my grandfather built doesn't function in the current market the way my sister refuses to accept. Historic preservation is admirable. It's also expensive, slow, and increasingly difficult to fund without the kind of capital restructuring she has blocked at every turn." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not trying to destroy my family's legacy, Mr. Walker. I'm trying to save the parts of it that can actually survive." It was a good speech. Ethan could tell it was practiced, but not over-rehearsed. Nathan had the intelligence to make prepared things sound spontaneous. Under different circumstances, some of it might even have been persuasive. But Ethan had spent 9 days in the walls of the Grand Bennett Hotel. "Coastal Heritage Materials," Ethan said. Nathan's expression didn't break, but something behind it moved. "I'm sorry. The supplier that received the original historic window assemblies removed from the Grand Bennett Hotel. 14 sets. Signed for by Marcus Thiel." Ethan held Nathan's gaze. "Where are those windows now?" The warmth in Nathan's face underwent a slow, careful change. Not disappearing, adjusting. Like a man turning a dial rather than flipping a switch. "I'm not sure what you think you found. I think I found a direct chain of custody connecting your personal project coordinator to the removal and private sale of irreplaceable historic materials belonging to a company you don't solely own. Ethan kept his voice completely level. I think the property management inspection reports from the 11 years prior to your renovation directly contradict every major damage claim your contractors billed for. And I think the audio in the video your team released was synthetically generated from recordings of my voice. He paused. I know it was, actually. We have the forensic analysis. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He sat back. And for just a moment, brief, quickly controlled but real, he looked tired. Not defeated. Just tired in the way of someone who has been running a very complex operation for a very long time, and feels for the first time the weight of it. You've been busy, he said. I fix things for a living, Ethan said. I'm thorough. What do you want? I want the property notice withdrawn, today, with written confirmation that the workshop title is clear and unencumbered. And in exchange, nothing. Ethan held his gaze. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here because you asked me here, and I needed to be somewhere for the next 2 hours. He checked his watch. I have about 90 minutes left. You can spend them trying to offer me things I don't want, or you can spend them calling your attorney. Either way, the board presentation executes tomorrow morning, and the evidence goes to federal investigators this afternoon. The silence that followed was the longest of the entire conversation. Nathan looked at him with an expression that had moved past warmth and strategy into something more unguarded. Something that might in another man have been respect. She found the right person, he said quietly. It wasn't quite a concession, but it wasn't nothing. She usually does, Ethan said, from what I can tell. He stood up, left 2 $20 bills on the table for the coffees neither of them had touched, and walked out. His phone rang before he reached his truck. Victoria, he answered. Tell me. Patricia Huang is in. Her voice was controlled, but underneath it was something bright and unsteady, like a light source not yet sure of its own wattage. She spent 2 hours with the evidence package last night, and she called 2 of the other undecided members herself this morning before I could reach them. How many do we have? 5 of the 6. Confirmed in writing to Margaret. A beat. The 6th, David Marsh, won't commit either direction, but 5 is enough. 5 plus my votes gives us the threshold. Ethan stood beside his truck and let that land. The full board presentation is tomorrow at 9, she continued. Margaret has the complete evidence package ready. The forensic analysis of the video is included. The federal inquiry referral goes to investigators simultaneously with the board meeting, so Nathan can't claim we use the legal threat as leverage. She paused. Ethan, we're ready. I know, he said. How did the meeting go? He knows what we have. He's going to call his attorneys tonight. He paused. Withdraw the property notice. She was already moving. He could hear it. I'll have legal contact his attorney within the hour. Victoria. Yes. You did this, he said. Everything we built, the evidence, the board conversations, the legal strategy, that was you and Margaret and your team. I just read the walls. A silence that held something he couldn't entirely name. You did considerably more than that, she said quietly. He got in his truck and drove home to pick up Lily. The board meeting the next morning lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes. Ethan sat in the back of the room, not at the table, not in a named seat. He'd been clear with Victoria that this was her fight to finish. His job was the evidence. Her job was the room. She was extraordinary. She walked them through the complete evidence chain with the same directness she'd brought to everything from the beginning. No spin, no softening, no attempt to manage perception beyond letting the documented truth arrange itself in chronological order. The property management inspection reports, the fraudulent billing records, the delivery receipts with Marcus Teal's signature, the forensic analysis of the synthetic audio, the shell company acquisition trail, Nathan's financial connections to vendors who had been systematically overbilling the company for 18 months, She laid it out piece by piece, and the room changed as she did. Ethan watched it change, watched the expressions of people who had been genuinely undecided shift as the weight of documented evidence accumulated past the point where reasonable doubt could hold it. Robert Caldwell, the board member who had leaked documents to the press, said nothing for the first 3 hours. In the 4th hour, when Margaret formally presented the evidence connecting his private equity interest to Nathan's restructuring plan, he asked to make a statement. He resigned from the board before the vote. Nathan's remaining allies, without Caldwell's anchor, held for approximately 11 minutes of deliberation. Then the vote happened, 11-2 in favor of removing Nathan Bennett from all operational roles, pending the federal investigation. Victoria retained full executive authority. The empire survived. Ethan stepped out into the hallway while the formal resolutions were being recorded. He stood there in the quiet corridor, and for the first time in 12 days, he didn't have anything specific that needed doing in the next 5 minutes. It was an unusual feeling. He wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. Danny called at 10:53. "Well," Danny said, "we won." A pause. Then Danny made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and an exhale and said, "Boss, you cannot just keep doing things like this." "I fixed a building, Danny. You took down a corporate conspiracy." "Same skill set," Ethan said. "Find the rot, document it, remove it, let the structure hold." Danny laughed properly this time. "Are you seriously going to spend the rest of your life pretending this was just another job?" Ethan thought about it. Probably. He hung up smiling slightly despite himself, and turned to find Victoria standing in the corridor behind him. She'd come out without him hearing. She looked for the first time since he'd known her like someone who had set something down. Not empty lighter. The specific lightness of a person who has been carrying a weight so long that they'd forgotten what their own posture felt like without it. They looked at each other. 11-2, she said. "I heard." "It's over. The hard part," he said. "The rest is rebuilding. That part I know how to do." She almost smiled. "I know you do." She looked at him for a moment. "I owe you something I don't know how to adequately express." "You don't owe me anything. We had an agreement and we both held it. Ethan." She said his name the way she'd been saying it for 12 days, without the professional distance she'd arrived with that first morning, with something more honest underneath. "I dragged you into a war that wasn't yours. I put your business at risk, and your workshop, and your daughter's sense of security. You showed me documents and let me decide," he said. "I decided. That's mine to own." You could have walked away. So could you. 4 years ago when Nathan started, you could have taken a settlement and walked away and built something else. He looked at her directly. "Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because my grandfather built it with his hands. And my father grew it. And 430 people chose to be part of it." She paused. "You don't walk away from things like that." "No," Ethan said. "You don't." The corridor held the particular quiet of a battle just finished, not peaceful exactly, but still. The kind of still that means something important has settled. "What happens now?" she asked. "For the company rebuilding the hotel properly. Legitimate contracts, accurate pricing, real restoration work. It'll take 8 months minimum if it's done right." He paused. "I know people." "I know you do." She looked at him. "I'd like to hire them." "We can discuss terms." She almost laughed. "Of course we can." 6 weeks later, Nathan Bennett was indicted on 7 federal counts, including wire fraud, corporate asset theft, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Marcus Teal cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence and provided testimony that locked 17 months of evidence into a coherent prosecutable narrative. Robert Caldwell's quiet resignation from the board did not protect him from the Securities and Exchange Commission inquiry that followed, and his private equity group's attempt to acquire Bennett Holdings properties was unwound entirely. The property notice on Ethan's workshop was formally withdrawn on the same day as Nathan's indictment. The title was clear. The building was his. He drove to the workshop that afternoon, unlocked the door, and walked in alone. He stood in the middle of the main floor for a long time. His father's workbench in the corner where the morning light hit it right. The smell of old wood and linseed oil that had soaked into every surface over 3 decades. The specific silence of a place that had survived something it shouldn't have had to survive. He put his hand flat against the wall. Still solid, still true. He went back to work. 8 months later, the Grand Bennett Hotel reopened. The restoration was complete. Not the fraudulent version, not the stripped and falsified shell Nathan's contractors had been building toward, but the real thing. Original materials where they could be found period-accurate replacements, where they couldn't every decision documented and defensible and honest. Ethan's crew had worked the project from January through August, and what they produced was the kind of work that made people stop in doorways and look up, not because it was flashy, but because it felt true, like something that had always been there and had simply been returned to itself. The reopening ceremony was attended by the Mayor 3 preservation organizations, a delegation from the National Historic Trust, and most of the 430 Bennett Holdings employees who still had their jobs because the company had survived. Victoria made several remarks at the podium. She was composed and precise and said everything that needed to be said about the company's future and the meaning of the hotel's survival. Then, near the end, she said something that wasn't on the prepared remarks. There is a man in this room tonight who walked into this building when it was being deliberately destroyed and read it the way only certain people know how to read old things, not just for what they are, but for what they were meant to be. She paused. He taught me that the most important skill in restoration isn't knowing how to fix what's broken. It's knowing what's worth saving. She looked directly at Ethan across the room. This foundation is dedicated to the preservation of historic American landmarks. Its director effective tonight is Ethan Walker. The room responded. Ethan did not. He stood in the back with his hands in his jacket pockets, and he felt something that he didn't have an immediate word for. Not pride exactly, not surprise, something quieter and more durable than either. The feeling of a thing having arrived at the place it was always moving toward, even when the path wasn't visible. Lily, standing beside him, grabbed his hand. "Dad," she whispered, "that's you." "I know," he whispered back. "Are you going to go up?" "In a minute." She looked up at him with her mother's eyes and her grandfather's seriousness. "You should go now. People are looking." He smiled. "Okay." He walked to the front of the room. Later, after the ceremony, after the speeches and the photographs and the conversations that Ethan endured with the patient good manners of a man who was more comfortable with buildings than crowds, he found a quiet moment near the windows he had rebuilt himself. He was looking at the light coming through them, the particular quality of evening light through original glass, the slight imperfection that made it alive in a way that modern glass never quite managed, when Victoria came to stand beside him. They were quiet for a moment together, the way people are quiet when they have already said most of the things that needed saying, and what remains is the kind of communication that doesn't require words. "You didn't know about the foundation," she said. "No." "Are you angry?" He considered it genuinely. "No." "Are you going to tell me I should have asked first?" "You should have asked first." She smiled. It was the smile he'd seen develop over 8 months. Not the composed professional expression she'd arrived with that first morning, but the real one underneath which was warmer and less careful and considerably more honest. "I'll remember that." He looked back at the light through the windows. 8 months ago, you stood on my job site and told me you needed someone to help you save an empire. I remember. You were wrong about what you needed. She looked at him. Was I? You didn't need someone to save the empire, he said. The empire was always going to survive. You needed someone to remind you that it was worth saving. He paused. That's a different job. She was quiet for a moment. Is that what you were doing? That's what I was doing, he said. She looked at the light coming through the windows he'd rebuilt. Then she looked at him, And what was in her expression was something that had been building for 8 months through evidence packages and board meetings and late nights and difficult truths. Something that was not professional gratitude, which she'd already expressed, but something considerably more personal and considerably more permanent. "You didn't just save my family's empire," she said quietly. "You helped me build a future worth sharing." He looked at her, and for the first time in a very long time, longer than the 12 days of the fight, longer than the 8 months of the restoration, longer than the 4 years since he'd learned to close the door on grief and build his life around the two things he could protect. Ethan Walker felt something shift in his chest, something that had been very carefully still for a very long time, beginning quietly to move again. "Yeah," he said. "I think we did." The wedding was held inside the Grand Bennett Hotel 11 months later, in the main hall, with its restored plasterwork and its white oak floors and its windows full of evening light. No boardroom politics, no press, no investors or attorneys or shell companies or federal investigators. Just family, just friends, just Lily in a blue dress sitting in the front row, looking immensely pleased with herself, and Danny Ruiz crying in a way he would deny until his dying day, and Margaret Chen in the back row, watching everything with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose best work tends to be the part nobody sees. And two people from different worlds who had found in each other, not just love, but the specific durable thing that underlies it, the willingness to stand in a difficult place and not flinch, and to build something real from whatever the wreckage leaves behind. Ethan Walker had spent his whole life restoring things people believed were beyond saving. He was very good at recognizing what was worth the work. He had never once in 38 years been wrong about that.